How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're starting Daf Nun, Daf 50 of masechta Avodah Zarah. Friends. Today we begin the fourth perek of masechta Avodah Zarah. We're going to be talking all about the Avodah Zarah called Markooless. Markooless. It's an Avodah Zarah where you throw stones. You make a pile of stones and you keep adding stones to it. I guess that's a kind of fun Markooless. Definitely beats Peor. Okay. Anyways. Alright, well, yeah, that's going to be like the main kind of gist of today's daf, I would say. So let us begin on daf Memtes, Omid, Beis, where the new perek begins. Okay, so says the Mishnah, Rabbi Shmuel Omer, says Rabbi Shmuel, Shalosh Avonim Zoy B'tzad Zo Markooless, Zo B'tzad Zo B'tzad Markooless Asuris. V'shtayim mutaris v'chamam sheniros imo asuris sheniros imo mutaris. Okay, so says Rabbi Shmuel. Okay, so be'etzem, as we're going to see in a little bit on Daf Nun Amud Aleph, be'etzem, to kind of get a Markooless going, you need to basically have, this is at least how I understand it, you basically take two stones, put another stone on top of it, and that's how kind of like the Markooless ball gets rolling. Now, I guess if there's like a Markooless and there's a bunch of stones, it's a very successful Markooless, very popular, people adding lots of stones to Markooless. And now next to that Markooless, there's three stones, let's say. Now those three stones are not in the 2-1 formation, they're just kind of next to each other. But they're in proximity to a bigger, more significant, proper Markooless. And then off to the side, next to the Markooless, there's just three stones next to each other. Not two and one on top, but just side by side. So let's read it again in the Mishnah. So Rabbi Shmuel, Omer says Rabbi Shmuel, Shalosh Avonim Zoy B'tzad Zoy, when you have three stones, one next to the other, B'tzad Markooless, and this is next to Markooless, Asuris. So the three stones are Asuris. They're be'etzem, we treat them like Markooless. V'shtayim mutaris. But if it's only two stones, then that's okay. It's not Avodah Zarah, it's not Markooless. But the Chacham say it's not about two or three, it's about, is it visible with the main Markooless or not? If it's visible with the main Markooless, sounds like a fish song. Seen the main Markooless. Reb Neil, is that what they're saying? What is that, character 0 or something? I see the main Markooless. So the Chacham say, so what's important is if they're visible with the main Markooless or not. If they're visible, then Osir, it's part of the Markooless. We're going to talk about in the Gemara. If they're not visible with the main Markooless, Mutter. The Chacham says, Sheniros imo, if the stones are visible with the main Markooless, Asuris. V'she'eniros imo mutaros. But if they are not visible with the main Markooless, mutaros, permitted. So now, frag die Gemara, Bishlam Rabbanon Kasavri Oivdin Nishvarim Niros imo Deikal Lememer Mine Nafal Asuris She'eniros imo mutaris. So I understand. So says the Gemara, I get the rabbis. Why? Because the rabbis hold, it's like we were discussing at the end of the daf yesterday, at the end of the third perek, we were discussing Ovdin the Shvarim. Do you worship pieces of Avodah Zarah? So the Chacham say yes, and therefore the Shaila here is these stones that we're talking about that are off to the side, that are in proximity to the Markooless, but not part of the main Markooless. These stones that are off to the side, so the shaila is, did they come from the main Markooless? If they did, so even though they're pieces of the main Markooless, so if they came from the main Markooless, so then they broke away from it, but who cares? Ovdin the Shvarim, we worship those breaking offing stones. So if they're visible with the main Markooless, so then they're usher, because we assume that they came from the main Markooless, and pieces of the main Markooless are also often the Shvarim. But if they are not visible with the main Markooless, well then we assume that they didn't come from the main Markooless, and then they're just stones, and therefore they're mutter. So I get the Chachamim who make this distinction about visible or not visible. Visible also, not visible mutter. Again, Bishlam, I understand Rabbanon. I understand the Mahalach of the Rabbanon Kasavre. They hold Ovdin the Shvarim that people worship pieces of an Avodah Zarah. So in this case, you have the main Markooless and some stones broke off of it. So then Neros Imo, if the stones are visible with the main Markooless, and therefore it is rational to conclude that since these stones are visible with the main Markooless, that they actually came from the main Markooless. So Asuris, they're Asuris because they're part of the main Markooless. They broke away, but Ovdin the Shvarim. She'ein Neros Imo, and if they are not visible with the main Markooless, well then mutaris, they're permitted, because if they're not visible with the main Markooless, they probably didn't come from the main Markooless, and they're just rocks. Stam azoi. Hello, Rabbi Yishmael. But according to Rabbi Yishmael, what's the deal? 3, 2, I don't get it. Micah Sover, what's his deal? If we say that they worship the pieces, so if they worship the pieces, then the question is, it's not a matter of 3 versus 2. The question is, did it come from the main Markooless or not? So afilu tartenami litzer. So if they came from the main Markooless, well then even if there's 2 of them, they should be osir. And if we say that they don't worship pieces of the Avodah Zarah, well then, even if there's 3 of them, they should be mutter. Nobody's going to worship that. Where am I? So then 3 should even be okay if they're not going to be worshipped anyways. So Omar Rav Yitzchok bar Yosef Rabbi Yochanan. So now comes Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef, and he says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan the following: Biyadua shenashru mimenu. If we know that the stones originated from the main Markooless, divrei kol asuris. Everybody agrees, osir. No matter 3, 2, visible, not visible. If we know that it came from the main Markooless, osir. Vafilu madamri ein ovdin l'shvarim. Hanemile avodas kochavim de lavainu orche avalocha de meikar tavur mizbar anu orche. Look, this isn't even a matter of ovdin l'shvarim or not. What's the shaila of ovdin b'shvarim be'etzim? Be'etzim, the shaila of ovdin l'shvarim is that when you have a idol that's up on a pedestal and it falls off the pedestal and breaks into, what do we say, a gazillion pieces. So the shaila is, are they going to worship that? It's broken now. People, are they going to worship it now that it's broken? But Markooless is a different thing to begin with because it's rocks. Rocks are not exactly connected to begin with. They fall apart. So therefore, look, this isn't even the question of do you worship pieces or not is not shaykh to Markooless. So Markooless, as it is pieces, and therefore, even if you say ein ovdin l'shvarim, if you know, however, that these rocks came from the main Markooless, everyone agrees it's going to be asur. So again, Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef and Rabbi Yochanan biyadua shenashru mimenu divrei kol asuris. If we know that the stones that we're talking about came from the main Markooless, everybody says in all scenarios, asur. Even if you say ein ovdin l'shvarim, that's not shaykh here. When we say ein ovdin l'shvarim, that's talking about idols where it's not normal. Yeah, you have an idol that's on a pedestal somewhere and it falls down and breaks into a million pieces. Okay, that's a question. Are you going to worship the pieces or not? This is different. Havalacha by Markooless to make kar tavur mizbere, that milchatchila from the get-go we're talking about individual rocks. Hainu orche, it's normal for the rocks to kind of get separated or maybe roll down the pile or whatever it might be. And if we know that the rocks came from the main Markooless, Osir ki plige, where the machlokes is bistome. The machlokes is when we don't know if the rocks came from the main Markooless, and now we have to use our noggins and try to draw conclusions about what we can observe to try to figure out, should we assume that these stones came from the main Markooless or not? And not only that, when trying to make our conclusions, if the stones that we are talking about are very close to the main Markooless, says Rashi, within an amma or less, so then there also we don't know, but we know. We will confirm, we will assume that if the stones that we're talking about are within an amma from the main Markooless, they came from the main Markooless, and they're Osir kipliga b'miruchakus. Where the machlokes between Rabbi Shmuel and the Chachamim is, it's when that's interesting. What's going on here? Is it I feel like maybe I think it's windy. There's like the shade is going up and down or something. No. So the machlokes is when it's further away from the main Markooless. That is where we have these differences of opinions. You have Rabbi Shmuel, you have the Chachamim when they're further away. But frag the Gemara, Markooless katani. But one second, Rabbi Shmuel made it clear that we're talking about stones that are next to the Markooless, right? What did Rabbi Shmuel say? I'm going back to the beginning of the Mishnah. Rabbi Shmuel, Markooless, next to Markooless. How could they be far away? It says next to it. So, and for the Gemara, bitzad arba ames didei. Well, next to it, within 4 amos, so kilu, more than 1 amma away, but still within 4 amas. So, okay, if these stones are within 1 amma of the main Markooless, Osir, came from the main Markooless. If it's further away from that, but still within 4 amas of the main Markooless, that is where we get to our machlokes. Rabbi Shmuel says, well, is it 3? Is it 2? The Chacham say, is it visible? Is it not visible? Okay. Rabbi Shmuel Savar says, Rabbi Shmuel, Osin Markooless Ko'in Bitzad Markooless Gadol. That Rabbi Shmuel says, look, here's the thing. Markooless people, they make smaller Markoolesses adjacent to, right, in proximity to main Markoolesses. So therefore, Rabbi Shmuel says, look, okay, as we said, everyone agrees if it's within an amma of the main Markooless, everyone agrees it came from the main Markooless, it's Osir. Within 4 amos of it, however, Rabbi Shmuel says, look, it's normal for Markooless people to make a smaller Markooless next to a larger Markooless. So if we have the main Markooless, and then, let's say, 3 amos away, you have some stones, so then Rabbi Shmuel says, now it depends. Shalosh, if there are 3 stones next to each other, not 2 with 1 on top, but 1 next to the other, right, 3 next to each other, the damyan the Markooless, which is similar to a Markooless, right? A Markooless is 2 with 1 on top. Here you have 3 next to each other, and it's in close proximity to the main Markooless. Asuris, that is Asuris. But Shtayim, however, 2, which is not similar to Markooless, which needs at least 3 to get started. So in that case, mutaras, they are permitted because there isn't a concern. So meaning, according to Rabbi Shmuel, the concern is that maybe they're making a smaller Markooless next to the main larger Markooless. If there's 3, then we assume that this is a smaller Markooless, but if it's only 2, we don't assume that it's a smaller Markooless. Rabbanan Savir was the Rabbanan view things differently. In Osen Markooless Katan B'tzad Markooless Gadol, they say, look, they don't make smaller Markoolesses next to larger Markoolesses, and therefore that's not a question. The question is, did these stones come from the main Markooless or not? And the answer is Loshna Shalosh Vloshna Shtayim, that regardless of if we're talking about 3 or 2, Niros imo asuris, she'ein niros imo mutaris. If these stones are visible with the main Markooless, it came from the main Markooless. If it's not visible with the main Markooless, it didn't come with the main Markooless, in which case they are permitted. Omar Mar, we said earlier, okay, so we had said earlier that if we know that the stones came from the main Markooless, everyone agrees, Asur v'raminu, but we have a contradiction. Avonim shenashru min Markooless, that when it comes to stones that fell from the Markooless, niros imo asuris, she'en niros imo mutaris. If they are visible with the Markooless, they are asuris. If they are not visible with the Markooless, they are mutaris. Rabbi Shmuel Omer Shalosh Asuris Shtaim Mutaris. Rabbi Shmuel says, well, if there's 3, then they are Asuris. If there are 2, then they are Mutaris. No, so what's going on? Because here we're talking about, what did it say? We said, Avonim Shenoshru Min Markooless. We're talking about stones that came from the Markooless. And now we're talking about, are they visible? They're not visible. How many are there? 3, 2. What do you mean? I thought we said that everybody agrees that stones that came from the main Markooless are also. Well, what's going on here? So Amar Rava Lo Tema Shenoshru Elei Moshe Nimtzu. Okay. So don't say that they definitely fell from the Markooless. No, what happened was they were found by the Markooless, and the question is, how do we treat them? Do we say that they came from the Markooless or not? And that's the machlokes between Rabbi Shmuel and the Chacham. V'savar Rabbi Shmuel shtaim mutaris. Now, does Rabbi Shmuel really hold that if there's 2 of these stones, then they are permitted? V'atani, but we learn in the Brayso Rabbi Shmuel. Let me say Rabbi Shmuel, shtaim b'tfisa lo asuris shalosh afilu muruchakos asuris shish. That we learn in the Brayso Rabbi Shmuel says that if there's 2 of them b'tfisa achas. So the way that Rashi explains b'tfisa achas is that tfisa achas is that there's no separation. There is no, what's the word that maybe I'm thinking of? Obstruction? Nah, not really. There's no separation between the stones and the main Markooless. So in B'tfisa Achas, when there's only, I guess, one straight, direct path, I guess, between the stones and the Markooless, Asur, right? So we say, Shtayim B'tfisa lo Asuris. So they are asuris, even 2 are asuris. Shalosh, now if there are 3, afilu meruchakos, even if they're further away, asuris, they are asuris. Okay? Rava says, Rava, lo kasha, it's no problem. Kam b'tfisa achas, kam b'shtei tfisis. Okay. So it depends if it's 1 tfisa or 2 tfisas. Let's go weiter for a second. Vechi dami, what's to do with these tfisas? The ika gova bene uvene. That there is something dividing between the stones and the main Markooless. No. So what's going on? So what's going on? So interestingly, what we introduce here, this is very interesting, because this is basically where we leave it. Tosfos understands this differently. We're not going to get into Tosfos. We're just going to explain it like Rashi. That this is where we leave things. Where do we leave things? We leave things thus. We just added a new distinction here, which is, is there a division, is there a blockage between the stones and the main Markooless? So here's the thing. If there is no blockage between the stones and the main Markooless, and again we're talking about within 4 amas, so it's niros imo, it's visible with the main Markooless, there's no separation. Even Rabbi Shmuel just said that even 2 would be asuris, right? We said, Rabbi Shmuel, shtaim b'tfisa lo asuris. Even Rabbi Shmuel would say that 2 are asuris, certainly 3 would be asuris when there's no obstruction. The Chacham would say that they're visible with the main Markooless, and therefore, of course, they're going to be asur. So everyone agrees they're asur. Really, the only place where they disagree is that when there is a blockage, when there's a blocker, so the Chacham would say, well, it's ein niros imo, so therefore they are mutaris, because they're not visible with the main Markooless, there's a blocker there. So they're mutaris, whether 2, whether 3, they're mutaris. So again, if there's no blockage, everybody agrees that everything is asur. Bishmal agrees 2, 3, that makes no difference. So Bishmal, the Chacham, everyone agrees there's no blockage, everything is asur. When there is a blockage, the Chachamim say that everything is mutter because it's being blocked, it's visible with the main Markooless. And there, Rabbi Yishmael would say 2 is mutaris because it wouldn't be considered a small Markooless. But 3 would be asuris, because it would be considered a small markooless when there's a blockage between the main markooless and these stones. So therefore, really the only place now where Rabbi Yishmael and the Chacham disagree, actually, is when there's a blockage and there's 3 stones. Again, when there's no blockage, everybody agrees that everything is also because it came from the main markooless. When there's a blockage, the Chacham say everything is mutter. Rabbi Yishmael says 2 is mutter, but 3 is also. So really the only place where they disagree is when there's a blockage and there's 3. Rabbi Yishmael says, well, it's a smaller markooless next to a larger markooless. And the Chachamim say they don't believe in the smaller next to the larger thing, since they're not visible with the main markooless, they're permitted. So now, frag the Gemara. Okay, where am I? Okay. Umarkulis kaigavna mi habe. Now, frag the Gemara, but one second. How could Rabbi Yishmael be saying that 3 stones, one next to the other, are osir? But that's not a markulis. V'atani, we learned it by say elu hein avnei beis kulis. These are the avnei beis kulis. Achas mikan v'achas al gabein. 2 with 1 on top of it, not 3 next to each other. Well, that's by the main markulis. It says Rashi tchilaso, when you're starting out a markulis, but right, so when you're like starting up a brand new markulis, then you start with 2 with 1 on top. But when you already have an established markulis and you have one of these smaller markulises next to the established markulis, well then it could just be 3 next to each other, and that's why Rabbi Yishmael says 3 next to each other are osir. Okay, all right, fine, very exciting stuff. Beyane Malka Charuv, King Yanai's house or palace or something, what got destroyed. Also of the Kochavim, Okimu Bey Markulis. And some people who are adherents to Markulis came and they set up a Markulis. Okay, well, now you have a Markulis set up. Also of the Kochav Machrine, but other of the Kochavim who they worship, I don't know, Peor or something like that, and they saw this Markulis and like, silly Markulis, and they took all the stones and they made roads with them. Also, the Markulis that they don't worship the Markulis, they worship something else. So Shaklinu, and they took all these Markulis stones because they didn't really care about them. Maybe in spite they took them. And they made them into roads and thoroughfares and things like that. Now the shaila is, can you travel on those roads that were made with the stones from the Markulis? What do you say? What says you? There were some rabbis, there were some rabbis who stayed away. They did not travel on those roads. They didn't want to be getting any benefit from Markulis. But there were other rabbis who did travel on those roads. Rabbi Yochanan, and says Rabbi Yochanan, Binon shel Kedoshim ma'alech aleim, the son of the holy ones traveled on these roads. V'ana nifrosh man, and we won't. What, are we holier than the son of the holy ones? The son, there's only one person who's known as Binon shel Kedoshim. That sounds like a nice name to be known as. And he would travel on the roads. Who are we to think that we're better than Binon Shel Kedoshim? Binon Shel Kedoshim. Who's Binon Shel Kedoshim? Rabbi Menachem Bar Simai. Interesting. Rabbi Menachem Bar Simai. Who's that? I don't know. Tzaddik Nister. Binon Shel Kedoshim. He would travel on those roads. It says, Rabbi Yochanan, who are you? Well, you think you're holier than Binon Shel Kedoshim? Why did they call him the son of the holy ones? He wouldn't even look at an image that was on a coin. If he had a coin and on the image there was some kind of a coin, he wouldn't even look at that. I was looking taka at Toisvis. Where's this on Daf Nun Beis, Amud Beis? Yeah, it's interesting. Toisvis on Daf Nun Beis, Amud Beis talks about the coins that they had in Jerusalem with David and Solomon. And Tosfos says that those coins didn't actually have the likenesses, the images of David and Solomon on it, because we don't make faces. We don't make faces. Instead, it would just say their name. Very interesting. Do we have archaeology to back that up? I feel like there are coins from the time of like King David and King Solomon and stuff, right? I think there are. That's pretty cool stuff. That's really old stuff. Bais Rishon. David was even before then. So apparently, they didn't have the faces on them, just the names. So Benon Shel Kedoshim, Menachem Reb Simai, he wouldn't even look at faces that were on coins. I guess those coins that had faces on them. My time in the man deparish. So according to those who did not use these roads, why? Sover la kihad Amar Rav Gidol Amar Rav Chia Bar Yosef Amar Rab, because they felt like Rav Gidol Amar Rav Chia Bar Yosef Amar Rab holds, which is minayin the tikrovis Avodah Zarah she'ein lo b'teila olamis. How do we know that things that have been offered for Avodah Zarah can never be batal? They will always be Avodah Zarah. Meaning, because here you had these Markooless, and then they clearly, whoever was right, Avodas Ovdei Chav Mevatel Avodas Chavim Shalom v'shal chaver. Where's this Mishnah? I think this is on Nun Aleph Mud Beis. Maybe Nun Beis Mud Beis. Yeah. Nun Beis Mud Beis is this Mishnah. So an Oved Chav can be mevatel Avodah Zarah of somebody else. So therefore, you had the house of Yanei HaMelech was destroyed. Some of the Chavim came and made a Markooless, and then other of the Chavim came and dismantled the Markooless. So they were mevatel the Markooless. So you would think if they were mevatel the Markooless, you should be able to travel on the road. So why were they not traveling on the road? Well, because these Markoolesses were offerings to Markooless. Right? You have this pile, like this heap of stones, and when I think we're going to talk about it Taka tomorrow, that when you have, every time you add a stone to Markooless, you are adding to Markooless, but you're also offering this stone to Markooless. And therefore, Rav Gidol is saying that since these stones were offerings to Markooless, they can never be batal, and therefore you can't travel on these roads. How do we know that when you have an offering to Avodah Zarah, it can never be batal? That they got involved with Baalpor, they were eating the offerings of the dead. Mames ein lo betela leolam af tikrovas of this chavim ein lo betela leolam. Just like a corpse, the tuma, I guess the tuma of a corpse is like never going to go away. So also the isser of when you have an offering of Avodah Zarah, it can never be batal. So even when these people dismantled the Markooless to make roads from them, it's still Avodah Zarah because these were offerings to Markooless. Umandelo parish, and the ones who traveled on the road, they didn't stay away from it. They traveled on the road. Amar be'ina ke'ein pnim v'leka. This is going to be more of a discussion on tomorrow's daf, I believe. That it needs to be ke'ein pnim. It's taka machloikes. Well, there's a shayla, do you need ke'ein zvicha, ke'ein pnim? Anyways, what ke'ein pnim means is that in order for something to be considered an offering to Avodah Zarah, it has to be offered in a way that is similar to how offerings are offered inside the Beis HaMikdash, and there is no offering in the Beis HaMikdash of stones. We don't offer stones in the Beis HaMikdash. And therefore, the opinion who says you can walk on these roads, it's because they felt that these stones were not considered offerings to Markooless, since it has to be ke'ein pnim, right? According to this opinion, it would have to be ke'ein pnim. It would have to be like they offer inside the Beis HaMikdash, and there's no stone offerings inside of the Beis HaMikdash, and therefore the Markooless could be batal, and they would travel on these roads because the Markooless was dismantled and made into a road, and therefore it's clearly batal, and they had no problem traveling on those roads. Omer of Yosef bar Abba, it says Yosef bar Abba, Ikla Rabba bar Yirmiyah la'asrin. Rabba bar Yirmiyah came to our place. Va'aso va'aisi masnisa b'yadi. He came and he brought a brisa with him. Givaldi, that must have been awesome, right? Somebody comes to town with a brisa. That must have been awesome. I'm serious. Because I remember back then, I say this from time to time. I mean, this was, first of all, we have the internet. We have information at mamish at our fingertips, like in unprecedented ways. But like, I don't even imagine, like, not that long ago, somebody comes with some news or something like that. Something new, and especially back then, This is what I'm saying. I think I mentioned this from time to time. Like, forever, Torah Sheba'al Peh was not written down. It was tradition, right? That's why you have Tani, Tana, Kame, whatever. Like, somebody would come and say a brisa, and then it would be discussed. If somebody had some new brisa, it's not like there were bookshelves and stuff like that where people were just studying, established brises. Somebody came with the brisa, and even now, sure, this was Amoraim already, but this was very fresh. I mean, Rebbe wrote down the Mishnayos and really edited the Mishnayos. What are we talking about? Rav Yosef Bar Abba. So I actually don't know who Rav Yosef Bar Abba is, or who Rabbi Bar Yirmiyah is, honestly. So I don't know what generation, but wasn't that, writing down stuff I think was still pretty new. And I think my impression is, I think I've seen this in some places, like even Amoraim didn't necessarily love writing stuff down. It takes time for change. For us, it's no brainer that we have a shas on our shelf. But, change takes time. People still like the old-fashioned ways for a while. Okay, so Amar Rav Yosef Bar Abba, Ikla Rabbi Bar Yirmiyah LaAsrin, he came to our place, also he came with a chiddush, he came with a brisa. Oved Kochavim Shevi Avonim and Markooless, that in Oved Kochavim, who brings stones from Markooless, V'chipu ben Drachim V'tartios, and he makes them into roads, Mutaris. They are permitted, because the Oved Kochavim was Mevatel, the road. Or it was Mevatel the Markooless and made it into a road, therefore it's Mutaris. However, Yisrael Shevi Avonim Mina Markooless V'chipu ben Drachim V'sartios Asuris. However, a Yid who does the same thing, the road is also, because a Yid can't break up, can't be Mevatel the Avodah Zarah of an Ovikam, as we've seen before, and I'll read it from the Mishnah that we quote. It's from Daf Nun Beis and Beis. We'll get there in 2 days. Ovikam, or maybe even 3 days. Ovikam mevatel Avodah Zarah shel Ovikam. Yisrael ein mevatel Avodah Zarah shel Ovikam. A Yid cannot be mevatel the Avodah Zarah of an Ovikam. And therefore, so if an Ovikam broke apart the Markooless and made it into roads, the road is mutter. If a Yid broke apart the Markooless, well, it's meaningless, and it's still Markooless, it's still Asur, and the road is Asur. V'leis nagar v'loi bar nagar di farkina. But then says Rabbi Bar Yirmiyah, however, I can't find any Talmud Chacham who can explain this brisa to me. I don't get it. Rav Sheshes says of Sheshes, look, Ana loy nagar ana v'loi bar nagar ana. Says of Sheshes, look, I am not a Talmud Chacham, nor am I the son of a Talmud Chacham. Ufariknale, but I can explain to you this brisa. My kushale to Rav Gidl. What was Rav Yirmiyah? What was Rabbi Bar Yirmiyah's issue? What was he said? Why was his mind blown? Why couldn't he understand this brisa? Because of Rav Gidl. That Rav Gidl had said, when you have an offering, when you have tekroves avodas kochavim, in this case the stones of Markooless were offered to Markooless. So therefore they can't be bottled ever. So how could you travel on that road? However, ba'ina ke'ein pnim veleko. However, the answer was like the other shita, which is that in order for it to be considered an offering, it would have to be ke'ein pnim, like something that we do inside the Beis Hamikdash, and we don't offer stones in the Beis Hamikdash. So actually, these stones of Markooless would not, as we said before, be considered a offering, and therefore they can be bottled, and that explains why when an Oved Kochavim breaks apart these stones of Markooless and makes it into a road, the Brisa says that it would be permitted to travel on the road. And now for the rest of the daf, we will discuss another Brisa, another incident like this where Rabbi Bar Yirmiyah came with a Brisa and did not know how to explain it, and we will try to explain what he did not know how to explain. Amar Rav Yosef Bar Abba, Ikla Rabbi Bar Yirmiyah LaAsrin, that Rabbi Bar Yirmiyah came to our place, Vasav Va'aisim Masniso Biyadin, he brought with him a brisa, and it was awesome. Maslin umezaymin bashviz ve'maslin umezaymin b'moyed kan v'kan ein megazmin v'sochen shem legazum b'moyed bin bashviz v'leiz nagar v'lo bar nagar di farkino shish. This brisa makes distinctions and similarities between shemitah and hamoed. On shemitah, of course, you're not allowed to work the land. You're not allowed to work the earth. However, if there are if you're not working and creating positive value to the earth, but kind of preventing loss or just kind of maintenance, that would be okay. But on chol hamoed, where you're not allowed to work, unless it's a davar ovid, something that's going to get ruined. However, if there's tircha on chol hamoed is not going to be allowed. So there are certain activities which during shemitah are allowed because they wouldn't be considered working the earth, but on chol hamoed it would not be allowed because of tircha, because it's too much effort. Okay, right. So Tosfos Taka says either you could say that on chol hamoed, meaning why would these things be asur on chol hamoed? Because after all, davar ovid is mutar. So Tosfos Taka says either it's talking about where it's not a davar ovid, and therefore we're saying you can't do it because it's tircha. Alternatively, if it's a lot of tircha, so then even a davar ovid you wouldn't do. Okay, fine. Now, so where are we? So again, Amar Rav bar Yosef, where am I? Amar Rav Yosef bar Abba, Ikla Rav bar Yirmiyah Asrin, Va'asa Avaisa Masnis of Yodeh. I'm reading this again. He came and he brought with them a brayso maslin umizamin bashveh. So on shemitah, you can deworm trees. You're not creating positive value, you're just preventing loss to the trees. So you can deworm trees during the shemitah. Umizamin, I don't know, that's applying some kind of a dung or something to a tree. That's also some kind of like preservation thingy. Ve'ein maslin umizamin b'moed, but you can't do these things on chol hamoed. Kan v'chan, now in both scenarios, shemitah and chol hamoed, ein megazmin, you cannot prune a tree neither on shemitah nor on chol hamoed. V'sochin shemen legazum bein b'moed bein b'shvius, and we can, if there was a branch that was pruned prior to shemitah or prior to chol hamoed, so you can apply oil to it, also some kind of like preservation thing. V'leis nagar v'leis bar nagar difarkine, and says Rabbi bar Yirmiyah, I can't find anybody who can explain it to me. I can't find a chacham or the son of a chacham. I can't find anybody to explain to me this brayso. Ravina ana loy nagar ana v'loy bar nagar ana umfarkina la. Says Ravina, I'm not a Talmud chacham, nor am I the son of a Talmud chacham, but I'll explain the brayso. Michael Kashli, what was Rabbi bar Yirmiyah's perplexion? Well, I'm not sure if that's the right word, but what was he perplexed about? What could he not wrap his head around? What could he not understand? If he was saying, well, Rabbi bar Yirmiyah couldn't understand what the difference would be between chol hamoed and shemitah. How come on shemitah deworming and dungifying are allowed but not on chol hamoed? Why? Why are certain activities permitted on shemitah but forbidden on chol hamoed? Midami, well, because they're different. Shemitah and chol hamoed are different. Shvius, melacha aser achmana tircha shari. Well, on shemitah, you can't work the land during the sabbatical year. You can't improve the land, grow stuff. But tircha, to exert oneself for preservation reasons, to deworm or whatever, that's okay. However, during the chol hamoed, it's different. It's a different concern. It's not about working the land that's particular asur. It's that we want you to enjoy chol hamoed, learn, enjoy yourself, and therefore tircha, even deworming, is not allowed on chol hamoed, even preservation kind of stuff. And again, as Tosfos says, either we're talking about something that is not a davar ovid. Alternatively, this is tircha yisera. But anyways, we want you to enjoy chol hamoed, therefore don't do these activities. Velazium agizum kokashale. Okay, maybe the question is, well, how come on chol hamoed, how come on shemitah, applying dung or some kind of spoiled something to the tree is allowed, but pruning is not? Mashna zium deshari, mashna gizum da'aser. Why is dungifying aser, but prunifying is, no, the opposite. Why is dungifying mutter and pruning is aser? Midami, well, what do you mean? They're very different. The nature of these two activities are very different. Zium okume ilna vishari, Dungifying is preserving a tree, which is why it's allowed. Gizum avruye ilna ve'asr, whereas pruning is to create new value. You prune a tree so that there will be improved and better new growth. So that is improving a tree. Therefore, it is not allowed on shemitah. Ve'ela zium azium kakashale. Okay, maybe the question is, how come dungifying during shemitah is allowed, but dungifying during chol hamoed is not? Dikatoni maslin umezamin bashvius. Oh no, sorry, that's not the question. The question is, we're going to see the question, that on the one hand we're saying that on shemitah you are allowed to dungify, but we have a contradiction. Mezamin esanetios, you can dungify saplings, v'korchin osan, and wrap them, v'kotmin osan, and apply ash to them. I guess some kind of fertilization thing, or maybe something like that. V'osan them botim, and you can make homes for them, umashkin osan, and water them ad Rosh Hashanah, until Rosh Hashanah of shemitah. Ad Rosh Hashanah in bashvius lo. So only until Rosh Hashanah can you dungify, but not after Rosh Hashanah, not during shemitah. Ad Rosh Hashanah in bashvius lo, but not during shemitah. So how come? So that's Rabbi Bar Yirmiyah's question. On the one hand, we're saying that on shemitah you can dungify, but we have a brayso that says you can only dungify until shemitah, but not during shemitah. But v'dilma k'd'Rav Ukva bar Chama. But maybe you can answer that too. Like Rav Ukva bar Chama, Rav Ukva bar Chama, trei kashkushe avu. There's two types of hoeing. You can hoe in two types of ways. One way of hoeing is to improve the tree. Okay, that wouldn't be allowed. But if it is to preserve the tree, to fix cracks and things, that is allowed. So here also, when it comes to dungifying, trei ziamume have. There's two types of dunging. One is to preserve the tree, that's permitted on shemitah. The other is to improve the tree, and that would not be allowed during shemitah. Okay, but anointing. Right, we said you can anoint a previously pruned branch during shemitah. But the katani sachin shemen legazum ben b'moed ben bashvius. Right, we had said in the brayso that you can anoint oil on a previously pruned branch, whether we're talking about chol hamoed, whether we're talking about shemitah. We have a contradiction. Sachin es hapagin umenakvin umefatmin osan ad Rosh Hashanah. That you can anoint with oil these, I think, like mini growths, umenakvin umefatmin osan, and you can pierce them and fatten them up with like oil or something. Ad Rosh Hashanah, until Rosh Hashanah. Ad Rosh Hashanah until Rosh Hashanah. Bashvius lo, but not during shemitah. Midami, is that similar? Hacha okume ilna v'shari asam patume perev aser. Again, here we're talking about preserving a tree, and therefore it's permitted. Whereas over there we're talking about fattening up fruits, and that is not okay. Amalei Rav Samar b'Rav Ashi l'Ravina bar Yirmiyah. What's maybe the Rabbi bar Yirmiyah? The Rabbi bar Yirmiyah. Sicha demoed azim demoed kakashli. Okay, here is what was bothering Rabbi bar Yirmiyah. The answer is, what was bothering him was, we said that anointing the branch on chol hamoed is permitted, but zium demoed is not permitted. Right? We had said that a branch that was previously pruned, you can apply oil to, whether on shemitah, whether on chol hamoed, because that is just preserving the tree. And yet we say you can't apply dung to the tree on chol hamoed. Why not though? That's also preserving a tree. We should be consistent. Both activities are to preserve. Applying the oil is to preserve. Applying the dung is to preserve. How come oil on the branch is mutter, dung is asur? So and that is why Rabbi bar Yirmiyah's mind was blown. Chaver, that was daf nun of masechta Avodah Zarah. On Daf Nun of Masechta Avodah Zarah, we started the 4th out of 5 perakim, the 4th perek of Masechta Avodah Zarah. We talked about primarily Markooless. We saw machlokes between Rabbi Shmuel and the Chacham about sort of these smaller Markoolesses. Are they Markooless? Aren't they Markooless? In what scenarios are they? In what scenarios aren't they? Okay. We said, how do you start a Markooless with 2 stones and 1 on top of it? We talked about how to be mevatel Markooless. We talked a little bit about tikroves avodas kochavim, offerings to Avodah Zarah. Now they can never become batel. We're going to talk more about that. I can't remember if it's tomorrow or the day afterwards. I think tomorrow. We're going to talk more about this tikroves avodas kochavim. I'd say those were kind of the main sugyas of today's daf. I hope you enjoyed, of course. Peace out.